All right, bear with me. I might still be letting some people in here, but thank you guys all for being here. Our Humane Communities topic, like Jennifer said, is euthanasia decisions. So we do understand that this may be an emotional topic, and I appreciate everyone being here to chat about this with us. As emotional as it can be, it is important, and we want to make sure that we include volunteers in that conversation. So with us today, we have a special guest. Gracie Curtis is going to be joining us from our behavior team, and she's going to be doing quite a bit of conversation with us about what that looks like in shelter, as well as helping the community when they have to make these difficult decisions as well. All right, so with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Gracie to tell you a little bit about who she is and her background and the work that she does with us.
Right, thank you, Ashley. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. My name's Gracie Curtis. I've worked at Michigan Humane for about 6 years. I'm currently the Behavior Health Services Specialist here at our Berman Center, but I started my time here as an adoption counselor and cleaning kennels. And then I moved into our shelter medicine department as a shelter med tech. And then I moved into our behavior department. My time at Michigan Humane has been kind of broad. So I've had an opportunity to work in a lot of different departments in the shelter. So I have a unique understanding of a lot of different aspects of sheltering and the challenges that come with sheltering. And I'm really happy where I am right now. I have a passion for behavior, and I love learning how dogs communicate with us so that I can better advocate for them and educate people and help us have a better relationship with our four-legged friends.
Thank you, Grace. So definitely, if you see Gracie around the shelter, don't hesitate to say hello. She's super helpful and friendly, and she'd love to help you out. So today, what we're going to be talking about, what is humane euthanasia. When we use that terminology, what are we talking about? As well as when is it necessary. So we're going to give you guys a couple scenarios and some of the ways that we help not only our animals in shelter, but those coming to us from out in the community that need our assistance with this hardship. And then how volunteers can recognize those emotions in themselves when we're dealing with this issue. We do work in an environment where we come across emotional situations pretty commonly. We want to help give you guys those tools to deal with those, help your volunteers deal with those, and help staff deal with those as well. And then just how you guys can help with this overall. Of course, we would never ask volunteers to help with the actual euthanasia process, but just to how you can be a support in this process and help each other out. Okay, so what we talk about when we're saying humane euthanasia. So really at its core, what euthanasia is a term that is a Greek term that means good death. So really what euthanasia and humane together is giving animals or any creature in distress a way to pass without that pain and distress. And realistically, it's kind of a gift that humans have been given to be able to end pain and suffering from animals and not making sure that they have to continue dealing with that. And we should really sometimes see that as a really important tool that humans have been given. Okay.
So when we talk about humane euthanasia, a lot of times we think about animals coming to the shelter and us making decisions whether they can be up for adoption or not. But really the first place that euthanasia comes into the work that we do at Michigan Humane is it's a service that we offer to the public. We all here on this call are animal lovers, and probably at some point, either now or in the past, have owned an animal. And as much as we wish it was, their life is not going to be forever. So euthanasia is something that we will all experience at some point, whether we're working in the shelter or not. And we choose to offer humane euthanasia to members of the public because it's often a really, really difficult process that they have to go through. We want them to have a safe and supportive space where they can reach out to receive this service for their pet. We're really proud in the fact that we do important training and certification for our technicians that work on site. And we have both of those on our clinic and shelter sides. And when we talk about offering humane euthanasia to the public at the shelter, One of the reasons people sometimes choose to come to the shelter is because it is a lower cost option. So I feel really fortunate that we are able to do that and sometimes bring in emergency appointments, because it can be really hard to get into your veterinarian sometimes as soon as you need to, and we don't want an animal to suffer needlessly. If we can prevent that suffering as soon as possible, then that's something we'd like to do at the shelter. There can be many reasons for humane euthanasia. One of the most common ones, like I just mentioned, is end of life. So there's nothing necessarily maybe wrong with a pet, but they are old, they're tired. Maybe they do have medical reasons that are ailing them, maybe not. Sometimes, again, they've just come to the point where there's nothing necessarily wrong, but they wake up one morning and they're having labored breathing, and their cat's, for example, 22 years old. And they've been skinny and thin. So this is a way that family members can bring their pet in to receive a service to make sure that they're not suffering anymore. There could also be medical reasons. So this sometimes comes along with age, but not always. I know that I was really unlucky, and one of the kitties that I owned, he unfortunately had to be put to sleep at 6 years of age. He had a really serious medical condition, which I did try to treat, and he was hospitalized, ended up having cancer, and we did take him home to be comfortable, and he had about a month left in him before I realized the quality of life just wasn't there anymore. And even though he was on medications and we were taking really, really good care of him, he was to the point where he couldn't walk and even get to the litter box, and he didn't want to eat food anymore. So we had looked into medical treatment for him, but at that point it would just be prolonging his life unnecessarily. So we, as a family, made the decision to put him to sleep. And then the third reason sometimes that owners have to consider euthanasia is for behavioral reasons. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But that's a really, really difficult thing too. Sometimes owners have gone through a ton of training with pets, have sought out behavioral services, and something with the animal is just not safe anymore to keep them in their home, whether that's multiple bite incidences to family members, sometimes neighbors. It may not always be a bite. There could be other reasons. Sometimes cats, no matter what medical procedures or behavioral training owners have done for cats, they continue to not use their litter box and urinate all over the house. And it can become really stressful and painful for the owners, and sometimes the animals too. A lot of times when dogs or cats bite, there's a lot of stress or fear that they're feeling in their lives. So a behavioral reason can be an option for euthanasia as well. And one of the reasons we choose to offer this service at Michigan Humane is because we really believe in building lasting relationships with members of the public and our pets. So we want folks to know that we're here not only for the beginning of a pet's life and those happy days during adoptions, but anytime throughout the life if they need help, even if that means a life is coming to an end.
Right. So talking a little bit about this service and the duty that we have to the community, I think it's important to understand that dogs most commonly come to us as strays from animal control or people from the public that find them, which unfortunately for us means that we have very little to no medical or behavioral history before that dog gets to us. I wish that there was a little microchip that you could scan that didn't just pull up their number to help them reunite with their owners, but that gave us a full history, medical and behavior. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So we do rely very heavily on reports from animal control officers or the public in the field on that animal, intake reports from the person that found them. Interactions that volunteers and staff have with the animals are really important. The sooner that we know about a behavior or medical concern, the sooner that we can start taking action and helping that animal. And then of course, foster notes is really ideal because it's a real life in-home situation. So our fosters provide us with a lot of great information, behavioral and medical information. I'm really proud to say that Michigan Humane does not euthanize animals for space or time, but instead for very severe medical or behavior concerns that can't be treated or managed by a typical adopter. We talk a lot about intake diversion because we know that typically the best place for a dog is with its family, with people that know it medically, know it behaviorally. And we want to avoid an animal really ever having to enter the shelter in the first place. So we have lots of systems in place to assist our community in avoiding having to surrender their dogs here, because oftentimes this is people's last resort and they don't want to part with their pet, but they're finding it hard to manage behaviors or medical. So our call center is kind of our first line of defense. They are a wealth of knowledge. They know all the right questions to ask to be able to route that person and direct them to the right place. Maybe that's our medical, like low-cost clinic, or even to the behavior department. We will call people in the community and just get a history and see if this is an animal that we can work with and maybe place up for adoption. And we love having that conversation with people to hopefully avoid even having to come into the shelter. We do have some rescues that we work with, and we can also give out, the names of some rescues in our community, especially for breed-specific dogs. For purebred dogs, they might have a better option going to a breed-specific rescue. And then we have a list of really trusted canine behaviorists and trainers that we can give out to the community if we think that that's appropriate. We also want to make sure that our community are supported even after they've adopted from us. We do offer a 60-day return policy. So that's a full refund if you return an animal within 60 days. We always encourage, even if it's outside that 60 days, we would rather have that pet be returned to us because we're familiar with the pet and they're familiar with us. So that's a post-adoption support that we offer. And then again, our call center offers support in resources, and then the behavior department as well offer any support that we can, really. So when I'm assessing a dog, my number one concern is community safety. So the first priority when we assess an animal is for risk, and that typically looks like assessing for aggression, either human aggression or maybe aggression towards animals. So every dog that comes into the shelter has to pass through the behavior department and complete a behavior assessment first. And that's a tall order because we are quite a small department. Here at Berman, there are 3 behavior evaluators and myself. And then at Detroit, there are 3 evaluators and a supervisor. And then the director is Keeley. So it's a small department for as many dogs that we evaluate every single day. But we really do try and look at every single dog as an individual and give them all the same amount of care and compassion as we do every single dog that comes through our building. So the behavior assessment consists of just testing for a dog's general social ability, their handling, resource guarding of maybe food or rawhide or toys, how they act when you try and play with them. They do have to meet some strangers while they're here, and then they have to meet some dogs and be able to be safe around dogs in the community. We try our very hardest to place dogs up for adoption, and some dogs take us days or weeks to really fully assess them to make sure that we're doing our best and the due diligence that we owe the dogs. And some dogs do get some heavier restrictions, maybe for children or dogs, just so that we can best set them up for success in their new home. And then some dogs get submitted to our rescue placement. So like I said earlier, if it's a purebred dog, often smaller breed dogs get rescue placement as well. There are lots of rescues in our community that can take a more fine-tuned approach in finding those dogs placement. They're typically held in a foster home and then found an adopter through the foster home. I do need to also consider a dog's behaviors in shelter and how that might put our staff and volunteer at maybe a higher risk. Oftentimes, some of the more difficult decisions that we make are dogs that start out in the shelter as safe, happy, healthy adoption candidates, but then over time they begin to decline and they might start to display some behaviors that may pose a risk to those handling them. And I think many of us have encountered a dog that maybe just last week was a total dream to get out of their kennel. But then today you go, they seem excited, they're leaping up, they're biting the leash, they're maybe even biting on our arms, on our legs, on our bodies. And that can really pose a significant risk to those that are handling them. And it doesn't mean that dog is automatically humanely euthanized. We do take other preventative measures. Maybe that dog needs some behavior medication to help kind of decrease that anxiety. We try and get them out of their kennel as much as possible. And we try and give them as much enrichment as possible. But unfortunately, while we do our best to prevent and manage kennel decline in a shelter, we do have to consider the animal's mental well-being and also the physical safety of the staff and the volunteers that are interacting with them. And sometimes this does mean making the decision to humanely euthanize them, even if they are passed their original assessment. And when we do make these decisions, we, like I said, consider the animal's quality of life as well as the adopter's quality of life, really. I ask myself when I see dogs displaying these behaviors, how risky is this? How likely is it to result in a bite? How manageable is this going to be for us in the shelter and for an adopter? I ask myself what this dog's life is going to look like in a home, and also what the adopter's life is going to look like when they're trying to manage this behavior. We don't just make it up as we go. We have a lot of tools and guidelines that we use as a behavior department. One of those is Dr. Ian Dunbar's bite scale. I love this bite scale. Dr. Ian Dunbar is a veterinarian. He's an animal behaviorist. He's a dog trainer. He's very well respected. And he came up with this nifty bite scale that looks at the severity of a bite and that dog's prognosis to live a really full, happy, and healthy life after that level of bite. Fortunately, we typically see level bites like level 1 and 2. It goes all the way up to 6. Those are like the puppies that when they're playing, they might too scratch you because they just got excited. And what Dr. Dunbar says about those dogs is they're really not dangerous. They're probably rambunctious, maybe a little over the top. They probably need some basic training, but they're really not a risk to the community. But what he says about the level 4 bites, 5 and 6, which 6 is unfortunately the person had succumbed to their injuries from that bite, is that prognosis is really poor. That owner compliance in rigorous training is really rare, which means that animal is very risky for the community. I also want to mention that he says that the dog has to be confined in a locked room when people are over that aren't the owner, that it has to be muzzled before leaving the home. So these are all things that point to a life of solidarity and confinement. And so when we're talking about quality of life, it's a poor quality of life for that animal and of course that pet owner. So that's one of the tools that we use when we're assessing risk, specifically for bites, when we have dogs returned or bites that happened in the shelter. We also just a few other things because we typically are assessing for risk for aggression. But some other things that we come across are canine compulsive disorder or severe fear, where that animal can't or doesn't want to be touched by people or interacted with at all. Dogs that have really poor bite inhibition, and then dogs with very severe separation anxiety. We had a dog last year that was displaying pretty severe compulsive disorder. Canine compulsive disorder is like obsessive compulsive disorder in humans. So this dog, he happened to be deaf and he chased shadows. It was hard to pick up on at first, and then the longer you hung out with him, you kind of sensed something was off. So he chased shadows, and specifically he chased his own shadow, the marking on the wall and on the floor. And it was getting to a point where it was dangerous for him. He was hurting himself. He was actually starting to chip his teeth because he was biting at the walls and at the ground. And he was deaf. So it was just kind of added to this layer of complexity because you really couldn't verbally get his attention and redirect him in any way. We decided that it just was such a poor quality of life for him. He had to be very highly medicated for these behaviors to decrease slightly. I'm not going to say they went away, they just decreased with such a high amount of behavior meds. We didn't feel like he was a good adoption candidate through Michigan Humane. Fortunately for him, his owner ended up reclaiming him. She knew about the obsessive behaviors. She reported it was extremely difficult to manage, but that was a dog that she knew, and she knew how to care for. She knew how to give him the best quality of life that she could. So it worked out for him to go back to his owner, but that's not a dog that we felt we could realistically ask, one of our average adopters to take on in that way. And I mean, I have a lot of stories. There's severe resource guarding that we see a lot. People will call us about dogs guarding very strange things, guarding their own urine, or like a towel that they used to clean up the urine. Resource guarding's hard because at its core, it's a perceived threat of a high value item. And so when you look at those two concepts, a high value item could be anything. I mean, it's usually food or toys, but it could be the couch. It could be a person. I've seen it be a leaf that they found in the backyard. I think I might see Keely on this call, and so she's familiar with that case. And then a perceived threat. They just have to feel like their item is in danger of being taken away. Often that looks like someone physically taking the item, but in severe cases, it looks like someone maybe just entering a room and that object or that item that they really like is somewhere in the room. So you can see how the severe resource guarding is a really high risk for putting people in danger. So we get calls like that a lot. It's a difficult thing to manage. And so in the very severe cases where a dog may bite over an item, that's a dog that we may choose to humanely euthanize for that reason.
All right, I wanted to unmute. I just wanted to add real quick for our volunteers that Gracie is mentioning severe. So that doesn't mean that we don't have dogs going up for adoption, that you will see some of these just like disorders with them, some of the resource guarding and things like that, but it may be more manageable versus what she's mentioning where someone may not even be able to walk into the room with them. So it does not mean just resource guarding in general is always an issue with our animals.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley. It's all a scale. So we assess risk, we see how manageable things are. A bite risk is always something that we assess. So thank you so much for clarifying that. Yeah, you will see dogs up for adoption with resource guarding waivers, and we try and give adopters as many resources as possible, and we try and be specific as possible with what we're seeing in the shelter. And we can, just do the best we can with the information that is presented to us in a shelter setting. So for this slide, I mean, sheltering is not an easy job. I know that we all know that. And you guys are all either in the building or fostering through us. So we appreciate you helping us out. Working with difficult behaviors requires resources. And as our resources increase, our ability to build our knowledge base and our capacity for care increases as well. And so we're able to maybe take on some more complex cases, but it does take resources, and resources are time, they are skills, they are people. It can look like medication, through our medicine department, placement options. So these are all resources, and we have a lot of animals in our care, and so we try and give each animal the same opportunity. But working with behaviors takes time, And just like in medical cases, we can come up with a treatment plan behaviorally. And it typically looks like getting them started on behavior meds to decrease their anxiety and stress in a shelter, getting them out of their kennel as much as we possibly can, giving them extra enrichment as much as we possibly can, making them feel better, basically, about being here, which is a really tall order because this is not the Holiday Inn. We try and make the shelter as pleasant a place as possible, but it's stressful. And so after all of that work, treatment plans can fail. Just like medically, treatment plans can fail, behavior treatment plans can fail. And so we have to consider that as well. Once we've given an animal all of our resources, is this still a realistic adoption candidate? We take into consideration whether this is a shelter issue. Shelter stress can make behaviors increase, and it can also hide some behaviors. So sometimes we get reports from fosters or adopters that return animals that give us a ton of information that we just didn't have here in the shelter. And so it's important. I think that's some of the hardest things for us to realize is the dog that we see in front of us might not be the exact same dog that gets adopted out or goes into foster. And so we do our very best to assess risk just based on the information that we have here. But knowing when to make the call, especially if it's a dog that's been in care and we've seen progress in the past, or we see the redeeming qualities or the potential, because that's our job, is to identify potential and assess risk. We have to keep the animal's quality of life and the risk to the community at the forefront and at the heart of everything that we do. And that's really kind of like my guiding light. And it's how I can make some difficult decisions and know that I have the best intentions of that animal at heart. And I know that I'm doing the best that I can, and my team is doing the best that we can with the information that we have.
I just wanted to add, I know we're focused a lot on behavior and what we do to treat animals behaviorally and not so much on medical. And that's, I think, because we've gotten to a place where it's almost to the point where we can treat almost anything medically for an animal. And even if that's going to be something that an adopter is going to have to take on, a lot of times we provide additional things into the home. We can pay for an animal to come back for a treatment for heartworm, for example. And so even though a dog might go into a home, we'll pay for their appointment to come back to the shelter to receive treatment for their heartworm and additional testing. We've gotten so far with the shelter medicine program, and we're still trying to get places with the behavior program. And resources are always going to be something that are limited, and so we do the best we can with what we have. So just wanted to point that out.
I do want to add, sorry to interrupt before you switch. We really didn't have a behavior department until about 2 years ago. We just used to be shelter med technicians that a select few of us behaviorally assessed dogs. So our capacity to work with, behavior concerns a few years ago, we are so far exceeding what we could even do 2-3 years ago. So just wanted to point out the behavior department is a relatively new concept, and it's a pretty exciting venture because now we have an entire department dedicated to trying to work through behavior concerns. Because Jen's right, we've come so far medically in what we can treat now. We're really on par with and sometimes exceeding, what the community might even treat for an animal. So it's pretty cool.
And to kind of piggyback off that too, what we are working on having volunteers involved when it comes to behavior is only growing more and more. I mean, just you guys being a part of things like this and just learning more about the shelter and what the processes are and how you can be a part of it, that's huge. doing things like our best practices with Beth Chamberlain, and learning skills to work with those dogs. Also, one of my favorite things to say is that we're all part of the behavior team, and we're all extra eyes on these things that we can help pass that information along. Like Gracie said, the behavior team is great, but it is still small. So having so many other people like volunteers and staff in different roles that can just give things that they're noticing, things that they're seeing, is only going to help us grow the ability to help care for these animals. So thank you guys for wanting to learn and do more. The next part that we're going to talk about here is just how we deal with this, because we are all in a very, I don't want to say weird, but get a different role than a lot of our peers may be. Probably some of the closest people to working in animal welfare would be people working in medical for humans. We're coming across things, even as a volunteer, that other jobs don't have to deal with on a regular basis. Losing those that we love, sometimes every day, can be a big weight on top of the people who work in animal welfare. So just wanting to make sure that you guys recognize some feelings that you might feel, and we might not be able to help solve all of it. We might not have all the answers, but we want you to know that we're here for you. So things like anger and sadness, just general gut emotions that you might feel when you hear about an animal who has been euthanized, or having to deal with your own pet, on top of coming in and seeing animals every day, can sometimes just reopen some wounds when you're noticing that behavior in another animal or something like that could come across. A feeling of hopelessness can happen quite a lot, because it's bigger than us, right? It's what we can manage, it's what we're given, and we can work with as best as we can, but it is still an issue that the community needs help with. And it's education, and it's providing knowledge to people, and it's working with not having so many animals being bred and not cared for properly, and all these other issues that are bigger than Michigan Humane and bigger than just shelters across the United States in general. So there can be a feeling of, I just don't know how this is ever going to get better, right? I can't imagine how we can get to a point where this ever changes, and that can lead to a lot of feelings of depression in you. So being aware when you're noticing that too, and feeling free to, reach out to somebody and talk. And like I said, links to previous things. So maybe you experienced a hard behavior with your own dog and had to make a tough decision with them, and now you're seeing it maybe with the dog you're working at the shelter, and just reopening those feelings sometimes can be really hard. And we want to make sure that you guys recognize that you're not alone in this. Staff are feeling this as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how everybody can kind of be encountering these things regularly. So one of the things that you may or may not have heard of is the term disenfranchised grief. And this can happen in these type of roles where other people are not close to this kind of work in your life. So you are used to coming in and seeing these things happen and getting a relationship built with these animals and feeling like you're really close with them and you love them. And maybe people who don't volunteer or don't come into an animal shelter on a regular basis understand why this is so hard for you to deal with. You can feel really devalued, like your work is not as important as it feels where you actually are at. And then stigma around it. So think of animal welfare, veterinarians, clinic workers. Sometimes there's a poor stigma that goes around with people that work in these type of environments and have to make these hard decisions. Instead of people feeling like they understand, they might be angry, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe these people are putting down animals on a regular basis. And hearing that repetitively from the community can cause a lot of pain in people, because we genuinely feel like we're doing a good job. You genuinely feel like you're doing a good job and doing the hard work that no one else wants to do. But when you're hearing that from other people, that can really, really make you feel like maybe this isn't what I should be doing. Not enough time to grieve properly. This is a huge deal for people who are physically doing euthanasia for animals. There's times, depending on where you work, different parts of the United States where they just don't have capacity. They do euthanize for space. That could be dog after dog, cat after cat, and you're not given that time to turn around and just grieve those animals, even if they're not our shelter animals. Doing that for the community over and over again can cause a lot of pain and stress on people. And that's why sometimes it is hard to have people stay in the veterinary field, is that portion of it. You can feel overwhelmed, like there's just too many dogs and I can't do enough, and I never have enough time to finish what I need to do. Your spouses may be like, why are you always at the shelter? What are you doing? And that can cause hardships within your own personal life as well. We mentioned this helplessness feeling of there's just not enough people doing the work, and then can lead to suppressed feelings. You might just decide, you know what, I can't worry about being upset about that dog right now. There's another dog and I got to just get to it. And that can cause some unhealthy, like rushing, and lead to compassion fatigue as well. And then these are just some examples here of some things that you may hear from other people that don't understand the work that you're doing. So why do you do this if it hurts you? I've talked to volunteers and they've had a bite or something happen at the shelter. And then of course people are worried for them, but it makes them start questioning the work that they're doing. It's just a dog. It's not your dog. It wasn't even your pet. Why are you so upset about it? And I could never do that, which also leads back to that, like feeling like you're a bad person for what you're encountering. I will say most people don't know what to say to people who are grieving on a regular basis. So they really don't know what to tell you when they haven't been in an environment like this. So that's why we like to just make sure that you guys know that you can come to us if you need to take a break and you just want to talk to us about something. If you're concerned about an animal, especially your coordinators, we're here for you for those hardships. And we want to make sure that you know you do have people. And you may find within a fellow volunteer, somebody who wants to, discuss this with you. And we're looking for more ways that we can help guide those conversations for you guys as well. So the next portion that we just want to talk about, and I know we've talked about previously in other presentations, but we do think that it is so important and we want to make sure that everybody is aware that this thing called compassion fatigue can happen in an animal welfare environment. This can happen in any job role that is dealing with the care of others. So even when I was a teacher before this, compassion fatigue can happen there, where you feel like you're exhausted and out of control of the situation around you, and seeing hardships in other people and having to take that on can happen regularly in these types of environments. So just to give you guys an overview of what this looks like, so that you have those skills to see it in yourself as well as in maybe your fellow volunteer, even a fellow staff member. If you're a volunteer and you're concerned that somebody is upset, you can come and talk to us, because that is just caring for each other. So things like feeling really exhausted, or feeling like your heart's not in it anymore. You're just kind of going through the motions and your enthusiasm for being here has drifted. Irritability, so just being short with those that you love or those around you. Cynicism and negativity, feeling like, well, it's never going to get better anyway. What does it matter? We just euthanized another dog the other day. Those kind of feelings in your mind are leading toward compassion fatigue. And affecting the animals or others around you. And we've seen this before, where volunteers are so urgently just trying to make a difference and rush that it actually can turn and hurt those that you're working with. I've seen I will use teaching as an example, where you get short with the kids because you're trying to get to the next kid. You're like, I can't deal with you right now. I have to get to the next one. And that's not an appropriate way for someone to deal with anybody. So same thing with the dogs. Will you just hurry up and come out because I have other dogs that I need to spend time with? That's not an appropriate way. And that's starting to feel those feelings of, the thing that I love is actually causing me pain because I want to love it more. And it is a weird cycle that can develop there. So just noticing that if you're seeing that in yourself or anyone else. And then some things that we can kind of do about it. So we don't just want to talk at you about what that looks like. We want to try and give you some tools as to help curb that. So acknowledging those feelings. can be really hard to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just snapped at that dog. But it's okay to recognize it and understand that that might be part of a feeling that you might be having. Self-care, I know this gets thrown around a lot, and we don't mean just like take a bubble bath, but what we mean is being aware of that and knowing when your limits are, and knowing that you need to take some time to maybe reach out to somebody or take a break from volunteering for a little while, or just doing something else. Maybe we don't go to the shelter today. Maybe I go and have a lunch with a friend and just, have a different kind of day today. Knowing that most other people don't know what to say. Like I said, you might get hurt a lot from words that people say, and just trying to give them that benefit of the doubt that they don't know what to say, and they're just trying to rack their brain to say something to you because they don't understand. Supporting each other. So support groups are really great. I am personally in some support groups on Facebook that are meant for animal welfare workers to have a place to share anonymously some stuff that they're going through at the shelter, and having people who just understand that issue or have gone through it before and can just talk to each other on there in an open, caring space with moderators who will help them deal with the situations together. So definitely look out for those. And if you would like suggestions, we will be sending those with the follow-up information after this. Recognizing your triggers. So if you know that every time I get frustrated, it's because of dogs that are jumping all over me, or it's because I am working with this type of behavior, maybe avoiding those for a couple of days. Maybe instead of the really difficult dogs, you just take out some of the calm, shy guys and make you, slow down a little bit. Or just, any other triggers that you might have. What can you avoid to help yourself? Being open and creating a safe space, of course, talking to each other, but understanding that it's definitely okay to tell someone that you don't want to talk about something. If someone approaches you with a hardship, another volunteer or somebody, you can most definitely say that you're not comfortable talking like that. But if you are, then just being that safe space for someone to talk with. I know we have a couple of volunteers that are very sweet and very willing to just have a little chat with somebody. You're more than welcome to be that person as well if you would like. I mentioned taking a break. That could be taking a break, just going to the break room between dogs and sitting down and having a glass of water. Please do that. Everybody needs to do that. But it also could be just taking a break in general or trying something new. So take a month off of volunteering. Just let us know. I need some time off. That's totally fine. Or, working with the big dogs has been really rough on me, and I think I need a change of pace. I think I want to work with the kittens for a little while, or I think I just want to do center maintenance for a little while. That is perfectly appropriate too. You guys are not pigeonholed into doing the one role that you chose when you first started. Things change all the time in our lives, and we might need to shift what we are doing, and that's totally fine. Talk to your coordinator. We are more than happy to pivot. We do it all the time for volunteers. So don't feel like you have to continually do something because you're being relied on. Any help in the shelter is help in the shelter, and we will take whatever you would like to give.
I also want to add to that. I know, again, we're focusing on dogs and the animals and decisions, and sometimes when they pass and how that can affect us, but this isn't the only way that we can become tired or feel like compassion fatigue is happening to us. I know one of my signs to being aware that maybe I'm not feeling as good as I used to is when I'm realizing that I'm taking on a lot of feelings and emotions from other people around me. And I notice that other people are feeling sad or struggling, and then that starts to affect me, and I find myself taking on more work or working through a lunch break or forgetting to eat food or forgetting to use the bathroom because I feel like it's so urgent and I have to get to the next thing. But the animals and the shelter work is never going to go away. I need to stop and take a breath and remind myself it's going to be here tomorrow. There are other people that can help me. And just reminding there are healthier ways to be a support system to my staff, peers, volunteers, friends around me. So it's just really taking a step back and recognizing it. That's the first way to keep yourself healthy. So again, if you're like me, maybe it's not always the animal, there's other things. So know that you're not alone, and it's okay to ask questions if you're not sure if this is something that you're going through.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, that's really, really true. Like giving yourself grace to just slow down and be okay, is something I think a lot of people in any type of job can get caught up in. So especially here, just give yourself grace. It's totally fine. Okay, so to talk of a couple ways that volunteers can help with this across over the whole shelter, but also outside of the shelter. So one of those ways is early intervention that can often come from volunteers. The sooner that we notice that behaviors are happening with our cats or our dogs or any type of animal that we have in care, and the sooner that we can start working toward helping them with that behavior, the better chances there are that we can figure this out together. So always feel free to share things that you've noticed when you're spending time with animals with your coordinator, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those different ways to get those information across to us. But we want to hear from you guys. You guys are also working very closely with those animals. And we are blessed to have so many volunteers and so many different volunteers that we may be seeing different things with different types of people, because there's different people handling these animals that we may not be able to see from just our behavior department. I think a lot of different people of different heights or different genders or different things that may be walking as volunteers, that we're seeing interactions differently with animals. And those are all really beneficial things that we can get from you guys. So please feel free to share. Also sharing resources. So as always, after these humane communities, we're going to be sharing out some of our personal resources for you related to these topics. But those might help some other people that you know too. So please feel free to share those resources or the things that you've just learned from working with us with other people when they're having hardships related to euthanasia, or the decision leading up to, or up to the decision of euthanasia. Advocate for shelter workers. So this is a huge one, and I know you guys are already doing this because you are wonderful and you love us. But not everybody's as lucky as Michigan Humane. Not everybody's as big and well stocked and resourced as we are. So just helping others understand what the inside of a shelter looks like if you have those conversations with people, and what that process looks like, so that we don't have people feeling like we're the bad guy, which thankfully has kind of morphed into a better understanding already. But we only want that to grow. So advocating for that when you're coming across some harsh conversations. And then taking care of one another, of course. So if you're concerned, like we said, I've had a volunteer tell me that they were concerned about a staff member, and because she brought that to our attention, we were able to go talk to that person and make them feel better, that we may not have noticed if she hadn't have said something. We were actually able to give that person some much needed break away from what they were doing, and that was really, really helpful. So obviously in an appropriate way, coming to talk to us and have a conversation. But sometimes that can really help somebody.
One other thing I wanted to add in too is when we say advocate for each other, or advocate for shelters and the work that shelters do, what that doesn't mean is get into battles or arguments with people. Those can actually be really hurtful and more harmful than good. So it's just making sure, kind of just like today, how we're doing this presentation and sharing information during a time where hopefully no one is necessarily hurting right now in this moment. People are more open to conversation at that time. So it's just being very thoughtful about how we advocate, and knowing that not everyone is going to think or feel or interact the same way, and being respectful to one another as well.
That actually is perfect, Jen. And you made me think of not just shelter workers, but just people who have to make these hard decisions in general. I think it's really easy for us to quickly say, I could never do that. Oh my gosh, how is that person making that decision? I could never be that type of person. But taking a moment to, before we jump to those quick conclusions of they don't care for their animal or something like that, that can be really easy out of frustration and anger when we hear about someone needing to euthanize their pet or surrender their pet. But taking a moment to step back and think of, what are some reasons this may be happening? I don't know that person's personal life. I have never been in that type of situation. I can't imagine what that decision has to look like. Just taking that minute to reflect on, there's a lot of things we don't know when we just hear that in passing. And just trying to be as open-hearted as possible for as many people as we possibly can is a great way to help with this. Okay, so some key takeaways before we open up for some questions. You guys are free to leave any questions you have in the chat that we will go over here in just a moment. Or if we have the time to have you guys raise hands and ask questions out loud. But before we get to that, just some key takeaways from this. So please remember that you're not alone. You have a whole 250 staff and 1,400 volunteers and 500 fosters that are going through this with you. And that's just Michigan Humane alone. We all know that there's way more shelters and rescues out there. So you're not alone in feeling these things. Reach out, tell us that you're having a hard time. And if we can help, we would most definitely love to help you out. Take those breaks in shelter and out of shelter, however those are needed. Please take those. You will never be judged for having to take a step back. And then realize that we're doing a lot of things to minimize the need for euthanasia. Just like Gracie said, we didn't even have a behavior team to help assess with these. Years ago, the decision to euthanize an animal was much quicker of just what do we have the capacity for? What do we have the space for? Now, because we have so many resources and so many options, we have done so much more to help minimize this need of how many animals need to be euthanized. And then everything you do helps. So like I said, if you take that break, and even if you still want to be in the shelter and what you're doing is helping fold laundry, that is still extremely helpful. Everything in this volunteer role is helpful. Even if that's just being at home and still being aware of what we're doing in the shelter, that is helpful. Does not always mean physically being here. So just know that even if you need those breaks, you are helpful, and knowing that even if you don't get to every dog or every cat every day that you're here, you were helpful to those animals that you did get to reach, and you were helpful to those staff who no longer have to worry about that animal because you did give time to them so they can focus their needs elsewhere. Everything you're doing is helpful. Okay, so we're going to see about some questions. Please feel free to drop any in the chat like we said. I am going to open up here so I can see if anybody would like to unmute as well. Okay, so my first question in here from Barb regarding level 2 dogs and cats and the volunteers who work with them. How can volunteers provide input to the behavior team regarding their experience with those animals? So there's a couple different ways. I can go ahead and take this if you guys want, and then you can add anything. So a couple different ways. Of course, you can always send us your concerns via email. Or call us. If we can answer it right away, we will, or leave a message. But any animals that you're concerned about, the best thing to do is take a photo of their profile, so like their paperwork on the front of their kennel, so that we have their name and or their ID number, so that we know who you're talking about. And then just give us whatever information that you can. And the best way that you can do that is giving us really detailed information. So if you're at Westland, there is a binder on Kellen's desk up by the volunteer kiosk that has lists of different terms to describe the behaviors that you're seeing. It's a big blue binder, and it says behavior concern form. And volunteers can also put information in there. Sometimes that's helpful to just jot it down really fast, and then we might reach out to you later for more information. But that's a really easy way to do that, especially because we're not always just available in the moment, so we can return back to your notes that you're leaving us. But that's a really good way at Westland. There's also some forms, and I think Allie's been working on some different ways to have kind of a binder type thing also at Detroit, but you can always reach out to us.
The animal concern forms are currently hanging on the bulletin board inside the volunteer office in Allie's office in Detroit. So they're not in a binder, but they are there. It says animal concern form on the top. and volunteers can leave behavioral or medical concerns on that sheet. Those are great for things that maybe aren't necessarily an emergency. Obviously, if it's something that's an emergency, please make sure that you're seeing a staff member. And if the staff member you get cannot help, they will make sure they reach out. Again, we all have walkies to a staff member that can, whether that's a manager or a behavior team member.
Thank you for that, Barb. That's a good question. All right, next here, Lynn. So Lynn asked, where are animals euthanized and what happens to the ashes? So Jen, because you've been to more of the buildings, can you kind of help with that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So every location has a euthanasia room. It's usually behind the scenes. So that way it is away from everything else and the other animals that are in the building to provide less stress for the animal that does need to go through that process, and also to give space for the people that are working in the building, because it can be really difficult. So euthanasia would only happen in the euthanasia room with a certified technician and then another staff member that has been trained to hold and comfort the animal during that process. So that is the only place. Each building has one of those, including the clinic. After the animal is passed on, animals that are shelter pets and even clinic pets, we have a cooler at each of our locations as well, that the animals' bodies are placed in until they can be picked up for either private cremation or communal cremation. So we work with a company called Partridge Enterprises, and they actually come and they pick up the animals to take their bodies and cremate them. We offer private cremation at the time of a euthanasia appointment for people coming in with their pets. Not everyone can afford it because it is really expensive. So that's why we have the communal cremation option as well. There are some other options like just receiving a clay paw print or an ink paw print. And sometimes our staff, if we have a client that's coming in through the clinic and then they've been a client with us for years, sometimes our staff will actually go above and beyond and create a little paw print for them too. So I have seen that as well. So that's kind of what happens with the animals. They are picked up multiple times a week from the shelter. Again, this isn't something that's necessarily a secret, but we don't necessarily parade people around these areas because we know it can be very sensitive and very difficult. And so usually if volunteers are going to be working or going near a space that does have potential to have humane euthanasia happening, we make them aware of where that room is, what signs they should look for if it's in use, and give them the option to avoid that area if they so choose. And that's the same for staff as well.
Thanks, Jen. Next one in here, Len says, studies have shown that the process is less traumatic for the animal if the owner is allowed to stay with the pet until the end. Does Michigan Humane allow this? Jen, can you feel that one too? Because I actually don't spend enough time in the clinic for me to know how that process looks over there.
Yep, I can answer that one too. So any appointments for humane euthanasia scheduled through our clinic, we do offer an owner to be able to stay for that process. Anytime anyone calls us about scheduling a euthanasia appointment, our call center staff ask several questions to kind of figure out what the owner is comfortable with. There are cases where owners do not want to be present in the euthanasia room. And so there are times when that might be a reason why someone chooses to have a euthanasia appointment through the shelter. Through the shelter, we do not have owners present in the room. They still get to come into the shelter with their pet. They do have a separate intake space where they are able to say goodbye and have those last moments with their pet, but they don't actually go into the euthanasia room. So it's kind of based on the owner's preference. Again, we always make sure they know when they're scheduling appointment what that process will look like, and we answer questions in detail so they can decide what is best for them or their pet. There is a price difference, so sometimes that might make it how people choose which way they would like to go, but not always. I can tell you, as being a pet owner, I have done both. My personal preference is to actually not be in the room with my pet. I found it too difficult. I really liked leaning on my fellow staff members who I trusted very, very much to take my animal and give them the best moments that they possibly could at the end of their life. It helped me remember, oh, I'm getting a little emotional here, my pet's happy at the end of their life.
Thank you, Jen. Okay. Lynn, did we answer the question for you? I didn't see when you had sent that over, about the process afterward. You can come off mute if you would like. Oh, maybe. Yes, okay. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that we covered what you were asking. Okay. Oh, Jen, did you-
Yeah, I was gonna say, I should clarify too, remembering my pet Happy. Well, what I mean by that, it was hard for me. I did not want to remember them in their last moments. I wanted to remember them alive and well, which, you know, can be hard to do depending on where they are in their stage of, you know, needing euthanasia. But so I think, again, just to reiterate, it's different for every single person. And being a person that had been trained to help hold animals for humane euthanasia, I've seen both, and I've had people decide, after even not being present in their room, decide to take their animal home or do cremation on their own, not through Michigan Humane, and have received hugs and tears and all kinds of things from the customers that I helped take care of their pet in these last moments. So
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways to kind of think about that is when you're thinking of like humans passing, the opportunity to have like open casket versus not, and kind of what people choose for their own wanting the end of life. The same thing happens with euthanasia, of how they want that process to look. And like I said, we will be giving you guys some resources if you're more interested in, you know, kind of these things, some really good dealing with the death of a pet type things that can also be helpful in this environment as well. Okay, I just want to see if anybody has any raised hands in here. Please, if you have any more questions, drop those in there. Doesn't look like it.
you can also raise your hand too, if you'd prefer. So you can scroll down to the bottom, bring up that option bar, and there is the reaction buttons in there. There's the raise hand option. If anybody would prefer to come off mute because they're not fans of using the chat, that's okay too. And even if you can't think of your questions today, you can always send those to Ashley or I. There'll always be a follow-up email that goes out after these. Happy to answer them. Whether that's in a couple days, a couple months from now, we're always open to questions.
Yeah. While we're looking just to see if anybody else has anything, Gracie, do you have anything that you want to add or anything like that? I know we kind of jumped to questions. I just want to make sure you got your ability to talk.
I see one more question that popped up. I don't have anything. I just wanted to thank you guys. You know, I know we have a question in the chat, but thank you guys for learning more about this. Education is, you know, gonna be helpful for you guys supporting the shelter workers that have to make these decisions and work with these animals. So we really appreciate you guys joining us today. And it looks like Catherine asked, who would we go to find out what happened to an animal if they are not in the shelter for our next shift?
So I can definitely, unless you want to field it, Jen, but you know.
I was just going to say, the person for you to go to is your coordinator. If they're not available, you can always send an email. We can most certainly take a look at what, you know, the outcome for that animal was. Again, we're very transparent. There are no secrets. So if you have a question because you're wondering where they went, we most certainly can look that up and give you more details on it. Sometimes animals are adopted, they're transferred to other locations. Just an animal being gone doesn't always mean humane euthanasia. Sometimes that will be the case. A lot of times though, there will be signs leading up to it. You know, maybe an animal will already be in behavior modification and we're keeping a close eye. It's very rare that a euthanasia decision would happen very quickly without a lot of other information going into it. But always come to your coordinator and ask if you have questions.
Yeah, and I'd just like to piggyback off of that. It's preferred for you to come specifically to the not behavior to the coordinators, because oftentimes staff are also finding out this information and can be really upset by the outcome as well. So just generally walking up to any staff member can kind of reopen that or surprise them, and can be hard for them, especially if they're not used to talking to volunteers on a regular basis. So coming to us is the preferred method, so that we're not, catching anyone off guard emotionally as well. Okay. Let me do one more check through here.
Think we are good. Looks like we answered Katie's question. Thank you, Katie.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. Like we said, we'll be sending out some resources for you very soon in the next day or so here. So keep an eye out for those. And I really appreciate Gracie, thank you for being here. Jen, thank you for your input. And then just all of you guys, thank you for wanting to know this information and being better volunteers and advocates for our organization. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you, Gracie. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
See you later. Bye, everybody.